The first time he saw her, she wasn't doing anything extraordinary, just sharing half of her small, carefully packed lunch with a stranger who looked like he hadn't eaten in days. But to him, in that quiet corner of a modest bakery, it felt like the world had stopped, and something inside him, something long buried beneath wealth and power, finally stirred again. If you believe kindness can change lives and second chances matter, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe, because stories like this remind us what truly matters. He had built an empire from nothing. Years of relentless ambition had turned him into one of the wealthiest men in the city. His name was known in boardrooms, whispered in business circles, and printed across headlines. But none of that mattered anymore, not after the accident that took his wife, not after the distance that slowly grew between him and his young daughter. Money had filled his accounts, but it had emptied something far more important inside him. He began to notice it in the silence of his mansion. The echo of his own footsteps. The untouched dining table that once held laughter. His daughter, once full of warmth, had grown distant, her smiles forced, her eyes searching for something he could no longer give. It was then that he realized a painful truth: he had spent so much time building a life, he had forgotten how to live it. So he made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He disappeared. Not entirely, not recklessly, but deliberately. He handed over temporary control of his business, created a new identity, and stepped into a life that stripped away every privilege he had ever known. He became a single father struggling to make ends meet, raising a daughter in a small, rented apartment on the edge of the city. For the first time in years, he had to worry about rent, groceries, and whether there would be enough money left for the week. He wore simple clothes, worked odd jobs, and blended into a world he had once only seen from a distance. And with him was his daughter, confused at first, unsure why her life had changed so drastically, but slowly beginning to understand something deeper. The early days were the hardest. Pride had to be swallowed. Comfort had to be sacrificed. He stood in long lines, counted coins, and felt the weight of judgment in people's eyes. But through it all, he watched his daughter closely. He expected her to complain, to resist, to long for the life they had left behind. Instead, she surprised him. She adapted. She learned to appreciate small things: a warm meal, a quiet evening, a shared laugh. She began to smile again, not because everything was perfect, but because she felt closer to him than she had in years. And that, more than anything, kept him going. One afternoon, they entered a small neighborhood bakery. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, filled with the comforting scent of fresh bread and the soft hum of conversation. It became their little escape, a place where, for a moment, their struggles felt lighter. That was where they met her. A young girl, no older than his daughter, sitting quietly at a nearby table. Her clothes were simple, slightly worn, but clean. She was focused on her notebook, scribbling something with intense concentration. Beside her sat a small lunch, barely enough for one. At first, nothing seemed unusual. But then a man entered the bakery, tired, worn, his face marked by hardship. He approached the counter, hesitated, and then quietly stepped back, unable to afford even the cheapest item. What happened next was something no one expected. The young girl stood up, walked over to him, and without hesitation, offered him half of her meal. There was no hesitation, no expectation of gratitude, just a simple, genuine act of kindness. The man hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but the girl insisted with a quiet smile. Eventually, he accepted. The millionaire, now just a struggling father, watched in silence. Something about the moment struck him deeply. It wasn't just the act itself, but the way she did it. As if kindness was natural. As if giving was simply part of who she was. His daughter noticed too. From that day on, the bakery became more than just a place to eat. It became a place of quiet observation, reflection, and unexpected connection. They began to see the girl often. Sometimes she studied, sometimes she helped clean tables in exchange for small meals. It became clear that her life was far from easy. And yet, she always smiled. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, their worlds began to intertwine. His daughter, once reserved, began to talk to her. At first, it was small conversations, about school, about books, about dreams. But over time, it grew into something deeper. They became friends. Through their friendship, he began to learn more about the girl's life. She lived with her father, who worked long hours but struggled to make ends meet. They didn't have much, but they had each other. And despite everything, she carried a sense of gratitude that was both rare and powerful. One evening, as he watched the two girls laughing over something simple, he felt a lump in his throat. It had been so long since he had seen his daughter truly happy. Not the kind of happiness that comes from expensive gifts or grand gestures, but the kind that comes from connection, from feeling understood. And in that moment, he realized something profound. All the wealth he had accumulated had never given him this. As time passed, he found himself changing in ways he hadn't expected. He became more patient, more present. He listened more. He noticed things he had once overlooked, the way his daughter's eyes lit up when she talked about her day, the quiet strength in the young girl's resilience, the small acts of kindness that often went unnoticed. But life, as always, had its challenges. One day, the girl didn't show up. At first, they thought nothing of it. But days turned into a week, and concern began to grow. When they finally learned the truth, it hit them hard. Her father had fallen ill, unable to work. Without income, they were on the verge of losing everything. The millionaire felt something shift inside him, a familiar instinct to solve the problem, to step in with money and fix everything. But this time, he hesitated. This wasn't about control. It wasn't about power. It was about understanding. So instead of revealing his true identity, he chose a different path. He found ways to help quietly, connecting them with resources, ensuring they had food, supporting them without stripping away their dignity. And through it all, he watched. He watched as the girl remained strong, caring for her father, continuing to give even when she had so little. He watched as his own daughter stood by her side, offering support, learning what it truly meant to care for someone. It changed them both. Months later, things began to improve. Her father recovered, slowly returning to work. Stability returned, piece by piece. And with it came a sense of hope that felt stronger than ever. It was then that he made his final decision. He revealed the truth. Not in a grand, dramatic way, but quietly, honestly. He explained who he was, why he had done what he did, and what he had learned along the way. The reaction wasn't what he expected. There was no anger, no resentment, just a quiet understanding. The girl's father, humbled but grateful, thanked him not for the help, but for the respect he had shown. And the girl, with that same gentle smile, simply said that kindness didn't need wealth, it just needed a willing heart. His daughter said nothing at first. But later that evening, she hugged him in a way she hadn't in years. And in that embrace, he knew he had found what he had been searching for all along. Not success. Not recognition. But connection. If this story touched your heart even a little, take a moment to like, comment, and share. It helps stories like this reach more people who need them. And before we end, tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment where a simple act of kindness changed everything? Because sometimes, the smallest gestures carry the greatest impact. In the end, he returned to his world, but not as the same man. He carried with him the lessons he had learned, the connections he had built, and a renewed understanding of what truly mattered. And somewhere, in a small bakery filled with warmth and quiet moments, a simple act of kindness continued to ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could ever measure.